Hey guys, tonight we're going to pull back the opulent layers of silk and grandeur to reveal the hidden sorrows of one of history's most seemingly privileged figures, a Joseon Dynasty queen. Forget the romanticized dramas and the serene beauty of the palace. You're about to discover how a young girl, plucked from her childhood, endured a miserable palace life, a gilded cage of crushing expectations, relentless political intrigue, and profound personal sacrifice. Frankly, you probably wouldn't survive the selection process without longing for a simple life in a quiet village. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from? And what time is it for you right now? Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself suddenly transported to the bustling, yet deeply stratified city of Hanyang, modern-day Seoul, in Joseon, Korea. Perhaps during the 15th or 16th century, you are a young girl, perhaps only 10 or 12 years old, born into a noble family. Your childhood, while perhaps comfortable, has always been overshadowed by one immense, unspoken possibility, the royal selection. And then the news arrives, shattering any semblance of a normal future. You have been chosen. This wasn't a fairy tale. The selection of a queen was a rigorous, multi-stage process, meticulously overseen by the royal court and powerful political factions. You wouldn't be chosen for your beauty alone, or your charm, but for your family lineage, your educational background, your perceived temperament, and, crucially, your family's political alignment. You were a pawn in a much larger game, destined to become the symbolic mother of the nation and the biological mother of the next king. It truly sucked to be picked for politics. Not for you. Imagine the stages of selection. You would be called to the palace, along with dozens, sometimes hundreds, of other noble girls. You'd undergo multiple rounds of interviews, scrutinizing your appearance, your demeanor, your knowledge of classical texts, and your obedience. Older palace women would assess your health, your bearing, and even your potential for fertility. Every glance, every answer, every subtle gesture was weighed. For the future of the dynasty rested on this choice. The pressure would be immense, a silent, suffocating burden on your young shoulders. For your family, your selection was a double-edged sword. It meant immense prestige, influence, and the potential for unparalleled power within the court. Your family would rise in status, benefiting from royal favor, but it also meant immense risk. Your family's fortunes would now be inextricably linked to yours, vulnerable to the shifting tides of court politics and the king's favor. Your private life would become public, your every move scrutinized. As you moved through the selection process, your personal desires, your dreams, and any burgeoning affections you might have harbored were systematically stripped away. Your marriage was not about love, it was about duty, lineage, and political stability. You were marrying the king. Yes, but more importantly, you were marrying the state. Your personal happiness was a negligible factor in this grand dynastic calculus. Once chosen, your life outside the palace abruptly ended. You would undergo a period of intense training in palace etiquette, court protocol, and the complex rituals expected of a queen. You would be separated from your parents, your siblings, and your childhood friends. The world you knew vanished, replaced by the vast, intricate, and often lonely confines of the royal palace. This was not a transition. It was a profound, irreversible severance from your past. It really sucked to give up your entire life for a crown. One common misconception is that all queens were chosen for their beauty. While beauty was certainly a factor, political influence and strong family backgrounds, which could provide support for the king, were often far more important. A queen from a powerful clan could stabilize the throne, but also threaten it if her family became too ambitious. Historians still meticulously study the genealogical records and political histories of Joseon queens to understand the complex interplay of personal attributes and political necessity in their selection. Furthermore, the very act of selection meant you were immediately surrounded by rivals, other girls who were not chosen, their families, and even factions within the court who favored a different candidate, would view you with resentment and suspicion. Your first steps into the palace were already onto a battlefield of subtle, yet deadly, intrigue. So your childhood ended not with a joyful transition to adulthood, but with a sudden, profound, and miserable severance from your former life. You were chosen not for who you were, but for what you represented to the state. This abrupt entry into a world of immense pressure, constant scrutiny, and deep political undercurrents was the brutal beginning of your life as a Joseon Dynasty queen, setting the stage for the manifold miseries to come. With your selection complete, sealing your fate, you are now thrust into the elaborate, yet often emotionally barren, spectacle of the royal wedding. This wasn't a celebration of love. It was a meticulously choreographed political performance, marking your formal entry into a life of profound confinement and making your new existence as queen undeniably miserable. Imagine the immense pressure leading up to the ceremony. You would undergo a series of strict rituals and preparations. Your every move, every gesture, every word would be carefully coached and scrutinized. You'd be taught complex palace etiquette, the correct way to walk, to bow, to speak, all designed to transform you from a noble girl into the dignified, almost ethereal figure of a queen. This rigorous training stripped away any lingering spontaneity or personal expression. It truly sucked to have your personality erased by protocol. The wedding ceremony itself was a lavish, multi-day affair, a grand public display of royal power and dynastic continuity. Picture yourself adorned in heavy, intricate robes of silk and gold, perhaps wearing a magnificent wig adorned with countless jewels and ornaments. The weight of these garments, the layers of makeup, and the restrictive headwear would be immense, a physical manifestation of the immense burden you were taking on. The ceremony would involve complex rituals, ancestral rites, and formal bows, often lasting for hours, demanding unwavering stoicism and physical endurance. However, beneath all the splendor and the meticulously observed rituals, the emotional reality was stark. Your marriage to the king was a political alliance, not a personal union. You likely had no prior relationship with him, perhaps only a fleeting glimpse of his face. Your union was for the sake of the dynasty, to produce heirs and to solidify your family's political standing. There would be no vows of personal love, no intimate moments exchanged. The king might already have numerous concubines and consorts, their beauty and charm already vying for his attention. You were the primary wife, the mother of the nation, but rarely the object of exclusive affection. It really sucked to marry for politics, not for love. After the wedding, your life immediately changed. You wouldn't share private moments or a cozy home with your new husband. Instead, you would move into the queen's separate residence within the palace, a luxurious yet isolated set of chambers that would become your permanent home. Your daily life would now be governed by a suffocating web of royal protocol and rigid schedules. Every meal, every visit, Every ceremonial duty would be meticulously planned and executed by a vast retinue of court ladies and eunuchs. Your husband, the king, would visit your chambers based on official schedules or his own unpredictable whims, not necessarily out of personal desire. These visits would often be formal, with the implicit understanding that their primary purpose was procreation. The personal, intimate side of marriage, as you might conceive it, was almost entirely absent, replaced by duty and expectation. One common misconception is that the queen immediately gained immense personal power and influence simply by marrying the king, while her status was supreme within the inner court. Her actual political power was often indirect and depended heavily on her ability to produce a male heir, forge strong alliances with scholar officials who often resented the influence of royal women, and navigate the treacherous world of palace intrigue without offending the king or his powerful maternal relatives. Her position was one of high status, but often limited direct autonomy. Historians still debate the precise level of political influence individual Joseon queens wielded, as official histories often downplayed or criticized female involvement in politics, while private records suggest a more complex reality. Furthermore, your identity as a queen was inextricably tied to your birth family. Your family's political fortunes would rise and fall with yours, making them both your greatest allies and a potential source of immense pressure and even danger. You would be expected to favor your family, to advance their interests, and to use your influence to benefit your clan. This created a constant tension between your duty to the king and your loyalty to your family, often trapping you in an impossible position if their interests diverged. So, your royal wedding, far from being the joyous culmination of a love story, was a grand, public performance that ushered you into a life of profound emotional coldness, rigid protocol, and the relentless pressure of dynastic duty. The ceremonial entry into your new existence was a miserable reality, stripping away your personal identity and cementing your role as a political and reproductive instrument of the state. Ensuring your palace life would be a truly gilded cage, with your marriage solemnized and your new residence established. You, the queen, are immediately plunged into the very heart of the royal household's most intense arena, the inner court, a labyrinth of concubines and consorts. Forget any notion of a serene, exclusive marriage. Your life would be a perpetual battle for the king's attention, a constant dance with jealousy and rivalry that made your existence profoundly miserable. Imagine the sheer number of women vying for the king's favor beyond you. The queen, the Jungjun, the primary wife. The king would have a multitude of royal consorts, Hugung, ranging from high-ranking concubines to numerous palace women. These women, often chosen for their beauty, their family connections, or simply the king's passing fancy, all lived within the inner court, in separate residences, but constantly aware of each other's presence and influence. It truly sucked to be one woman among hundreds. Each consort's ultimate goal was to bear the king a son, particularly if you, the queen, had not yet produced an heir, or if your sons died young. A son from a consort could potentially become the next king, elevating his mother and her entire clan to immense power. This created a relentless, unspoken, yet fiercely competitive environment. Every night, the king spent in another consort's chambers. Every rumor of a pregnancy would be a source of immense anxiety and strategic maneuvering for you. Your power as queen was primarily derived from your status as the mother of the nation and the potential mother of the crown prince. However, this power was constantly challenged by the consorts. They would use their beauty, their charm, and their access to the king to try and gain his affection and, crucially, to try and undermine your position. You would have to constantly maintain your dignity, adhere to strict protocol, and subtly wield your influence to counter their schemes. Palace ladies and eunuchs were crucial players in this intricate game. They served as your eyes and ears, but also as potential spies for rival consorts. Whispers, rumors, and subtle manipulations could spread like wildfire through the inner court, designed to discredit you, to highlight your perceived flaws, or to elevate a rival. You could never fully trust anyone, constantly wondering whose loyalty was genuine and whose was merely a facade. It really sucked to live in a constant state of paranoia. The king's affections were a fickle son. His visits to your chambers were often formal for duty rather than deep personal connection. His time and affections would be divided among many women, each desperate for his attention. You might see a consort rise quickly in favor, gaining wealth and influence, only to fall just as rapidly if she displeased the king or was outmaneuvered by a rival. This constant flux of favor meant that no position, not even yours, was entirely secure. One common misconception is that the queen was universally revered by all palace women, while she held supreme rank. The intense competition for the king's favor meant that concubines and their families often viewed the queen as their primary obstacle. Some historical records tell tales of outright animosity, even attempts at poisoning or witchcraft against the queen by jealous consorts, highlighting the extreme measures some would take. Historians still debate the precise power dynamics between the queen and the highest-ranking consorts, often finding a delicate balance of influence that could shift dramatically based on personality, political backing, and the birth of heirs. Furthermore, the very rules of the inner court forced a kind of detached observation while you were part of this intense competition. Open displays of jealousy or anger were frowned upon and could be seen as undignified or even a sign of weakness. You had to maintain a serene, composed exterior, even as your heart might be racing with anxiety or resentment. This emotional repression added another layer to your misery, forcing you to bottle up your true feelings. The only true solace might come from your direct female attendants or trusted eunuchs who had no personal stake in the king's affections and whose loyalty might be to you alone. But even these relationships would be carefully managed, never truly intimate friendships in the modern sense. You were the queen, yes, but also the most isolated figure in a sea of women, all vying for the attention of one man, and all seeing you as the ultimate prize or obstacle. So, your life as a Joseon Dynasty queen was far from a comfortable existence of serene power. It was a constant, exhausting battle within the inner court, a labyrinth of concubines and consorts perpetually vying for the king's fickle favor and the ultimate prize of an heir. This relentless competition, the pervasive paranoia, and the profound lack of genuine emotional connection made your royal existence a truly miserable and isolating ordeal. As you, the queen, navigated the treacherous currents of the inner court, one demand, more fundamental and relentless than any other, would dominate your existence and determine your ultimate fate: the brutal pressure to conceive and produce a male heir. This was not merely a wish, it was the very foundation of your power, your security, and the dynasty's future, making your life profoundly miserable until this duty was fulfilled. Imagine the constant, unspoken scrutiny. From the moment you were married, every month would bring renewed anxiety. The king, the royal family, And the powerful scholar officials all waited with bated breath for news of your pregnancy. Your fertility was not a private matter. It was a matter of state, openly discussed and meticulously monitored by palace physicians and court ladies. Every missed cycle, every fleeting symptom would be analyzed, fueling hope or despair. It truly sucked to have your reproductive organs be a matter of state policy. The pressure intensified with each passing year. Without a male heir, your primary purpose as queen was to ensure the continuity of the royal lineage. Without a son, the dynasty's future was uncertain, potentially leading to political instability and power struggles. This immense dynastic burden rested squarely on your shoulders, making you perpetually aware of your vital, yet vulnerable, role. You would be subjected to various traditional medical treatments and remedies aimed at promoting fertility. Palace physicians would prescribe complex herbal concoctions, often bitter and unpleasant, designed to balance your humors or strengthen your reproductive organs. You might undergo acupuncture or other traditional therapies, all with the hope of conceiving. Imagine drinking foul-tasting teas and enduring uncomfortable treatments, desperate to fulfill your duty. The constant presence of royal consorts exacerbated this pressure. If a consort managed to conceive a son before you, or if her son was perceived as more favorable than yours, your position could be severely undermined. Her child could become a contender for the crown prince position, and her family would gain immense influence. This intensified the internal court rivalries, as every pregnancy, especially of a male child from a consort, was a potential threat to your power and your family's standing. It really sucked to compete in a royal baby race. If you gave birth to a daughter, while she would be loved and cherished, the pressure to produce a son would not diminish. It would only intensify. A daughter could not inherit the throne, nor could she secure your legacy as the mother of the next king. You would immediately be expected to try again, continuing the agonizing cycle of hope and anxiety. The ultimate nightmare was barrenness. If you failed to produce any children, especially sons, your position as queen could become untenable, while outright dethronement was rare and politically risky. You might face public scorn, lose the king's favor, and see your power wane dramatically. The king might even elevate a consort's son to crown prince, marginalizing your own status and potentially stripping your birth family of their influence. Your entire life's purpose, your family's investment, could be rendered futile by a biological reality beyond your control. One common misconception is that kings always blame the queen for barrenness without question, while the primary blame often fell on the queen. There are historical instances where the king's own virility was quietly questioned, or where political factions maneuvered to place blame on either side. However, the social and dynastic pressure on the queen to produce an heir, particularly a male one, remained overwhelmingly dominant. Historians still meticulously analyze historical texts and medical records to understand the varying perceptions of fertility and barrenness in the Joseon Dynasty, and how these beliefs influenced court politics. Furthermore, the very concept of your body as a vessel for lineage stripped away any personal intimacy from your relationship with the king. His visits to your chambers were often driven by dynastic necessity, not necessarily affection. You were not just a wife. You were the instrument through which the royal line would continue. This reduction of your personal identity to your reproductive capacity contributed to a profound sense of dehumanization, making your private life a matter of public and political scrutiny. So, your life as a Joseon Dynasty queen was profoundly miserable due to the relentless, soul-crushing pressure to conceive and produce a male heir. Your power, your security, and your very sense of purpose hinged on this biological imperative. turning your inner court into a battlefield of rivalries and your private life into a public spectacle of dynastic anxiety. This constant demand for progeny was a defining burden, shaping every aspect of your royal existence, even as you wrestled with the crushing pressure to produce an heir. Your life as a Joseon queen was a daily tightrope walk across a landscape of constant, terrifying palace intrigue. Forget serene royal duties, your existence was shadowed by whispers of plots, cunning machinations, and the chilling, ever-present threat of poison, making your opulent life profoundly miserable. Imagine the intricate web of factions woven throughout the palace. You weren't just contending with individual consorts, you were at the nexus of powerful political clans, your own birth family, while your greatest ally could also be a source of immense pressure, expecting you to advance their interests. Rival families, whose daughters had become consorts or who sought to place their own candidate on the throne, would view you as their primary obstacle. Every social gathering, every seemingly innocuous conversation could be a veiled maneuver in this ruthless game of power. It truly sucked to have tea with your enemies. The ultimate weapon in this arsenal of intrigue was rumor and slander, a whispered accusation about your character, your health, your family's ambition, or even a fabricated act of disloyalty could reach the king's ear and destroy your reputation. Palace maids and eunuchs, constantly observing and reporting, could be bribed or coerced into becoming spies. You could never truly relax, constantly aware that any misstep, any perceived flaw, could be magnified and used against you. But the fear went far beyond mere reputation. The threat of literal poison was a chilling reality in Joseon court life. History is rife with tales of queens and consorts who allegedly met their end through insidious means. Imagine receiving a gift of food, a special herbal tea, or a fragrant cosmetic, and having to subtly ensure it was tasted by a servant first, constantly wondering if this seemingly benevolent offering was, in fact, a death sentence. The paranoia would be immense, turning every meal into a test of survival, every gesture of kindness into a potential trap. It really sucked to literally test your way through dinner. Plots could be incredibly intricate and far-reaching. You might face accusations of witchcraft, of engaging in black magic against the king or his consorts. You might be implicated in a fabricated rebellion or a scheme to elevate a specific prince to the throne. These were not just baseless rumors. They could lead to full-scale investigations, tortures, and executions, often involving not just you, but your entire family. The stakes were always life and death, both for yourself and your loved ones. The king himself, while your supposed protector, could also be a source of danger. His trust was paramount, but his affections were fickle, and his decisions could be influenced by powerful factions or jealous consorts if he came to believe a rumor, or if his advisors turned him against you. Your power could evaporate, leaving you vulnerable to your enemies. His occasional illnesses or peculiar behaviors might even fuel your own suspicions. Was he truly sick, or was he being subtly poisoned by a rival? The pervasive atmosphere of distrust would consume even the most intimate relationships. One common misconception is that all palace intrigues were successful. While history remembers the spectacular downfalls, many plots were likely detected, foiled, or simply never came to fruition. However, the constant attempt at such intrigues, the perpetual threat of being targeted, created an atmosphere of pervasive anxiety that deeply impacted the lives of everyone in the inner court, especially the queen. Historians still meticulously study court chronicles and palace diaries like the Seongjong-won Ilgi, the daily records of the royal secretariat to piece together the complex and often obscure details of palace conspiracies. Trying to discern truth from politically motivated accusations. Furthermore, your power as queen, while significant, was often indirect. You wielded influence through careful manipulation, subtle persuasion, and strategic alliances rather than direct command. This meant you had to constantly be astute, reading between the lines, anticipating threats, and reacting with cunning. This relentless mental strain, this perpetual game of chess with invisible opponents, would be incredibly exhausting. So, your life as a Joseon Dynasty queen, despite its outward splendor, was profoundly miserable due to the chilling reality of palace intrigue. You were constantly navigating a treacherous landscape of political factions, rival consorts, and manipulative servants, with your life and the lives of your family hanging by the thinnest of threads, the whispers of plots, the specter of false accusations, and the ever-present threat of poison made every day a terrifying gamble in a gilded cage, even as you, the queen, maneuvered through the treacherous currents of palace intrigue and the constant pressure for an heir. Your life was ultimately defined by an even more fundamental source of misery, your absolute dependence on the king's favor. The king's affections were a fickle sun, capable of elevating you to immense heights or casting you into profound disgrace, making your seemingly powerful existence profoundly miserable. Imagine your world, your status, your influence, your very security, all flowed from the king. He was the center of your universe, the source of all authority. His smile could bring you immense joy and solidify your position. His frown could plunge you into despair and vulnerability. You were constantly attuned to his moods, his preferences, and the subtle shifts in his attention, knowing that your fate hung entirely on his unpredictable will. It truly sucked to have your entire life depend on one man's mood. The king's favor was not just about personal affection, it was a political tool. He could elevate a consort to undermine your family's influence, or he could publicly slight you to send a message to a challenging political faction. Your personal relationship with him was intricately interwoven with the complex power dynamics of the court. This meant that even moments of intimacy could be fraught with unspoken political implications, blurring the lines between personal connection and strategic maneuvering. Royal consorts, your constant rivals, were acutely aware of this dependency. Their primary goal was to capture the king's heart, or at least his attention, to secure their own position and, crucially, to produce an heir who might challenge your children's claim to the throne. You would constantly witness the ebb and flow of the king's affections, a new consort gaining his favor, receiving lavish gifts, spending more nights in his chambers. Each shift would send ripples of anxiety through your household, reminding you of the precariousness of your own standing. It really sucked to compete for attention you didn't even want. The king's arbitrary nature was a terrifying reality. Unlike modern rulers bound by constitutions, the Joseon king's power was virtually absolute. He could banish a consort, depose a queen, or execute an official purely on a whim, or based on a whispered accusation. While a queen's removal was a drastic political move that required significant justification and political maneuvering, it was not unheard of. History records numerous instances of queens being deposed or even forced to drink poison like Queen Yoon, mother of King Yeonsangun, often due to political machinations disguised as personal slights or failures. This constant threat of disfavor would manifest in various forms. You might find your daily visits from the king becoming less frequent, your requests for resources for your household might be denied. Your family members might suddenly find themselves stripped of titles or banished from court. These subtle signs of waning favor would create immense anxiety, forcing you and your family to scramble, attempting to regain his attention and reaffirm your loyalty. One common misconception is that a queen, once crowned, was completely secure, while her position was the highest in the inner court. Her security was contingent on many factors: her family's political strength, her ability to produce male heirs, and, crucially, her sustained favor with the king. A king deeply infatuated with a consort or politically swayed by a rival faction could make a queen's life a living hell, even if she nominally retained her title. Historians still meticulously study the various case studies of deposed or marginalized Joseon queens to understand the precise political and personal vulnerabilities that led to their downfall, often highlighting the king's central role. Furthermore, the king's own physical and mental health could directly impact your life. An illness, a period of depression, or even a sudden shift in his personality could drastically alter your standing and security. You were inextricably linked to his well-being, both literally and figuratively, making his health a constant source of quiet worry. So, your life as a Joseon Dynasty queen, despite its immense outward splendor, was profoundly miserable due to your absolute and precarious dependence on the king's favor. Your security, your power, and your happiness were held hostage by his unpredictable affections and the complex political currents of the court. This constant dance with vulnerability, this perpetual awareness that your entire existence could be shattered by a single royal whim, was a defining, soul-crushing burden of your gilded cage, even as you navigated the terrifying politics and the king's fickle favor. Your life as a Joseon queen was relentlessly constrained by an intricate web of royal protocol and rigid rules. Forget personal freedom or spontaneous moments. Your existence was meticulously choreographed. Every action, every word, every gesture dictated by centuries of tradition, making your splendid life profoundly miserable. Imagine your daily routine. It began before dawn, not with personal choice, but with a strict schedule imposed by court ladies and eunuchs. Your morning toilette was not a private affair. It was a formal process, with numerous attendants assisting with your complex robes, elaborate hairstyles, and intricate makeup. Every piece of clothing, every ornament was dictated by your rank, the season, and the specific ceremony you were attending. There was no casual Friday in the palace. It truly sucked to have every outfit dictated by ancient rules. Your interactions, even within your own chambers, were governed by strict etiquette. You wouldn't simply stroll through the palace or casually chat with servants. Every conversation had a specific protocol, every movement a prescribed dignity. Your food, though lavish, would be served with elaborate ceremony, often by dozens of court ladies. Even your sleep was regulated, with attendants always nearby, subtly observing your every move. Privacy, as you understand it, was a foreign concept. Then there were the endless ceremonies and rituals. As queen, you were the symbolic mother of the nation, a crucial figure in countless state and ancestral rites. You would participate in elaborate ancestral worship ceremonies, Jongmyo Daije, requiring hours of solemn bowing and precise movements. You would attend state banquets, receive foreign envoys, and oversee various court functions, all demanding unwavering composure and strict adherence to complex rituals. These were not mere formalities, they were deeply significant acts, meticulously performed, that left no room for error or personal deviation. Imagine standing for hours in heavy robes, performing intricate bows, all while maintaining a serene, perfect expression. It really sucked to be a full-time ceremonial robot. Your movement within the palace was severely restricted. While the queen's residence might be vast, you couldn't simply wander freely through the Forbidden City. Certain areas were off-limits, access to others required formal permission, and your movements were always accompanied by a retinue of court ladies and eunuchs. You lived in a gilded cage, surrounded by beautiful gardens and opulent pavilions, but unable to explore them at will. The outside world, beyond the palace walls, was largely a distant memory, glimpsed only through carefully curated reports or the rare, highly formalized public procession. Even your speech was regulated. You had to use specific honorifics and a particular style of address depending on who you were speaking to, the king, the queen dowager, royal consorts, or court officials. Casual slang or emotional outbursts were strictly forbidden. Seen as undignified and unbefitting your royal status, this constant need to control your language, to adhere to rigid linguistic conventions, added another layer of emotional repression to your already constrained life. One common misconception is that all Joseon queens were constantly engaged in political power struggles. While some certainly were, many focused heavily on fulfilling their ceremonial duties and adhering to protocol, which consumed a vast amount of their time and energy. This meticulous adherence to ritual was considered a form of governance in itself, symbolizing stability and order within the dynasty. Historians still debate the precise balance between political ambition and ritualistic duty for individual Joseon queens, often finding varying priorities based on their personality and the political climate of their reign. Furthermore, this rigid adherence to protocol extended to your personal relationships. Even your interactions with the king, as we discussed, were often dictated by formality and dynastic duty, rather than spontaneous affection. Your children, too, would be raised by wet nurses and palace tutors, with your interactions often governed by strict schedules and formal visits, limiting the natural intimacy of a mother-child bond. The very system that elevated you also distanced you from genuine human connection. So, your life as a Joseon Dynasty queen, for all its outward splendor, was profoundly miserable due to the suffocating weight of royal protocol and rigid rules. Every moment, every action, every word was meticulously choreographed, leaving no room for personal freedom, spontaneity, or authentic self-expression. You were a living symbol, a meticulously maintained figurehead, perpetually trapped in a gilded cage of unending ceremony and control, even as you diligently adhered to the suffocating dictates of royal protocol. Your life as a Joseon queen, paradoxically, was one of profound isolation, surrounded by thousands of palace residents. From court ladies to eunuchs, you were truly connected to few, making your opulent existence profoundly miserable. Imagine your daily reality. You lived in vast, luxurious chambers, waited on hand and foot by a multitude of attendants. Yet, these attendants were primarily servants, bound by strict rules of hierarchy and deference. Their role was to serve, not to engage in genuine conversation or companionship. While some might develop a degree of personal loyalty, their true duty was to the royal institution, not to you as an individual. You could never truly let your guard down, knowing that even a trusted servant could inadvertently or deliberately reveal a personal detail that might be used against you. It truly sucked to be surrounded by people and still be alone. Your interactions with the king were often formal and infrequent, particularly after the initial years of marriage. As we've discussed, his time and affections were divided among numerous consorts, and his visits to your chambers were often driven by dynastic duty rather than personal desire. Even when he was present, Strict protocol and the presence of attendants limited genuine intimacy or unreserved conversation. The deep emotional connection you might crave, a normal part of any marriage, was largely absent, replaced by a cold, formal relationship of duty. Your children, the very purpose of your existence, were also largely removed from your daily life. After birth, royal children were often raised by wet nurses and palace tutors, while you, as the queen, would visit them and oversee their education. Your interactions were often structured and scheduled, not spontaneous. This limited daily contact, designed to ensure proper royal upbringing, meant you were largely deprived of the natural, intimate bonds of motherhood. Imagine hearing your own child call their wet nurse mother more often than they called you. It really sucked to be a queen whose kids were raised by others. Your birth family, while a crucial political support, was kept at arm's length by strict court rules. Direct visits to your family home were rare, permitted only on special occasions and under heavy escort. Communication was often through formal letters, scrutinized by palace officials. While you might hold immense influence over their fortunes, the personal connection, the casual warmth of family, was largely severed, replaced by a formal, political relationship. This physical and emotional distance from your own kin contributed to a profound sense of loneliness. And then there were your rivals, the numerous royal consorts, while you shared the palace with them. Your relationship was inherently adversarial, driven by competition for the king's favor and the ultimate prize of an heir. This constant underlying tension precluded any genuine friendship or camaraderie among the women of the inner court. You were constantly aware of their maneuvers, their pregnancies, their attempts to undermine you, fostering an atmosphere of pervasive distrust rather than companionship. One common misconception is that the queen's vast palace chambers offered her freedom. While certainly spacious, these chambers were often a form of literal confinement. Certain gates might be locked, specific areas off limits, and your movements always observed. Your world was limited to the confines of the palace walls, with little direct exposure to the outside world beyond carefully controlled information. This gilded cage, though beautiful, was still a prison. Historians still meticulously study palace layouts and court regulations to understand the precise limitations on a Joseon queen's physical movement and social interaction, confirming the profound sense of isolation despite outward splendor. Furthermore, the emotional repression demanded by royal protocol added another layer to this isolation. As queen, you were expected to maintain an image of serene dignity, suppressing any outward displays of anger, sadness, or personal distress. This constant need to control your emotions, to present a perfect facade, meant you rarely had an outlet for your true feelings, further compounding your sense of loneliness and making genuine emotional connection incredibly difficult. So, your life as a Joseon Dynasty queen, for all its immense outward splendor, was profoundly miserable due to an pervasive and inescapable isolation, surrounded by thousands, yet truly connected to few. You lived in a gilded cage, cut off from genuine human bonds and personal freedom, perpetually alone in your royal duties and struggles. This profound solitude was a defining, soul-crushing burden of your majestic yet deeply unhappy existence. Even as you, the queen, grappled with profound isolation and adhered to suffocating protocols, your position was frequently exploited by forces far beyond your control. You were a political pawn, often wielded by powerful factions in larger games of power. With limited personal autonomy despite your immense symbolic status, this constant manipulation made your seemingly powerful life profoundly miserable. Imagine the political landscape of Joseon Korea. The king, while absolute, ruled with the advice and often under the influence of powerful scholar official factions, often divided into factions like the Westerners, Southerners, Northerners. These factions constantly vied for control of the court, the government, and the king's ear, and you, the queen, were an invaluable asset in their struggles. It truly sucked to be a queen whose family used her as leverage. Your birth family, or maternal relatives, Ichuk, played a critical role. If your family was powerful, they would use your position as queen to advance their own interests, securing high offices, wealth, and influence. They would expect your loyalty and leverage your access to the king. While this could provide you with a powerful support base, it also meant you were under immense pressure to act in their favor. Even if it conflicted with the king's desires or the good of the nation, you were their key to power, and they would exert constant pressure on you. Conversely, if your birth family was weaker, or if rival factions gained ascendancy, you could easily become a target. Political enemies would attack your family, accuse them of corruption or disloyalty, and by extension, seek to undermine your own position. You might find yourself caught in the middle of a brutal power struggle, unable to protect your loved ones or yourself. As the political tides shifted, queens were often deposed or even exiled if their birth families lost power or became embroiled in major political scandals. Your primary duty was to produce an heir, and the crown prince became another focal point for political manipulation. If your son was crown prince, rival factions might try to discredit him or conspire to replace him with a prince from a different consort. You would have to constantly protect your son's position, navigating treacherous waters to ensure his succession. His very existence was a political tool, and you were his primary guardian in a dangerous game. Even your seemingly personal actions, like promoting a court lady or expressing a preference, could be interpreted as a political statement or veiled act of patronage. Every move was scrutinized for its potential political implications, leaving little room for genuine personal initiative. You were perpetually aware that your life was not truly your own, but a piece in a larger, complex political chess match. It really sucked to be a political chess piece. One common misconception is that all Joseon queens were powerless figures, while their direct political autonomy was often limited by Confucian ideals that discouraged female involvement in government. Many queens exerted immense influence through indirect means, advising the king in private, building powerful networks of eunuchs and court ladies, and using their prestige to support their birth families. Their power was real, but often subtle, wielded from behind the scenes rather than through overt command. Historians still meticulously study the various strategies queens employed to exercise influence, acknowledging their agency within a highly restrictive system. Furthermore, the concept of regent queens highlights this complex power dynamic. If the king died and the crown prince was too young to rule, the queen mother or queen dowager might serve as regent, wielding immense, direct political power. This could be a period of immense influence, but also intense political vulnerability, as rival factions would try to control or depose her. This temporary shift in power underscores that a queen's influence was often contingent on specific circumstances, rather than an inherent right throughout her life. The constant need to navigate these political currents, to maintain alliances, to counter plots, and to protect your family, would be incredibly exhausting. You would live in a perpetual state of heightened awareness, analyzing every rumor, every gesture, every shift in power. This relentless mental strain, this unending political dance, added another profound layer of misery to your opulent existence. So, your life as a Joseon Dynasty queen, despite its immense symbolic power, was profoundly miserable. Due to your constant role as a political pawn, you were a tool in the hands of powerful factions, your family's fortunes tied to your every move, and your autonomy severely limited by the complex web of court intrigue, this pervasive manipulation, this constant awareness of being used for larger political games, ensured that even at the pinnacle of power, you were rarely truly free. You've traversed the intricate, often terrifying, and profoundly miserable life of a Joseon Dynasty queen, from the brutal selection that stole your childhood to the crushing pressure for an heir, the pervasive palace intrigue, and the constant manipulation by political factions. It's clear that your existence, for all its outward splendor, was ultimately a testament to profound personal sacrifice and an almost unimaginable lack of freedom. As the whispers of court ladies fade and the imagined scent of ancient incense dissipates, a final, overarching truth settles upon you. Your royal life was a gilded prison, a paradox of immense privilege and profound solitude. Consider the immense privilege that surrounded you. You lived in the heart of the magnificent Forbidden City, adorned in luxurious silks and priceless jewels. Thousands of servants attended to your every need, from preparing your elaborate meals to meticulously dressing you. You held the highest female position in the kingdom, the symbolic mother of the nation, revered and respected by the populace. You had access to the finest education, the most exquisite art, and the accumulated wisdom of the dynasty. This was a life of opulence beyond the wildest dreams of any common person. However, this splendor came at an unbearable cost, profound solitude and pervasive control. Your magnificent palace chambers, while spacious, were also your gilded cage. You were isolated from your birth family, your childhood friends, and the outside world. Your interactions with the king were often formal and infrequent, driven by duty rather than affection. Your children, the very purpose of your existence, were largely raised by others, denying you the natural intimacy of motherhood. You were surrounded by people, yet truly connected to few, living in a constant state of emotional detachment. The suffocating grip of royal protocol and rigid rules dictated every single moment of your life. Every gesture, every word, every meal, every ceremony was meticulously choreographed, leaving no room for spontaneity or personal expression. You were a living symbol, a meticulously maintained figurehead, perpetually performing a role. This relentless adherence to ritual and tradition stripped away your individuality, forcing you to suppress your true emotions and desires, further compounding your isolation. It truly sucked to be a magnificent statue. Then there's the constant, underlying fear. Fear of failing to produce a male heir, which could undermine your position and disgrace your family. Fear of palace intrigue, of a rival consort's machinations, of a false accusation leading to deposition or even poison. Fear of the king's unpredictable whims, knowing your security hinged entirely on his fickle favor. This perpetual anxiety, this constant need for vigilance, made true peace of mind an impossible luxury. Finally, the lack of true autonomy. Despite your immense symbolic power, you were often a political pawn, manipulated by powerful factions and forced to act in ways that served dynastic or familial interests rather than your own. Your life was not your own. It was a tool, an instrument of state, leaving you with little personal agency even at the pinnacle of power. Your existence was a paradox wielding great influence, yet ultimately unfree. One particularly poignant and often overlooked. Detail is the queen's attempts to find solace in scholarship or artistic pursuits. Many Joseon queens were highly educated, versed in classical Chinese texts, poetry, and calligraphy. They would often seek refuge in these intellectual and artistic endeavors, finding a rare space for personal expression and inner freedom amidst the rigid confines of their lives. These intellectual pursuits were not just hobbies, they were vital coping mechanisms, a means to maintain their sanity and identity in an otherwise soul-crushing environment. Historians still meticulously study their surviving writings and artistic works to glimpse the inner lives of these powerful yet isolated women, revealing a profound human spirit yearning for more than mere survival. Ultimately, the story of a Joseon Dynasty queen is a powerful testament to the human capacity for endurance in the face of profound personal sacrifice. It reveals a life of unparalleled luxury and immense social status, intertwined with an unyielding burden of duty, relentless danger, and pervasive loneliness. Your existence, for all its splendor, was a gilded prison, a life profoundly, undeniably miserable. As you now drift into a deep, comforting sleep, let the whispers of palace intrigue and the heavy silence of lonely grandeur fade into the background. You are safe, warm, and free to pursue any path you choose, far removed from the opulent yet soul-crushing realities of Joseon Korea's inner court. May your dreams be peaceful, filled with the boundless possibilities that come with true self-determination and genuine human connection. A stark contrast to the miserable truth we've explored tonight. You've completed your stark journey through how a Joseon Dynasty queen endured a miserable palace life, and as the phantom scent of ancient incense and the echoes of palace intrigue finally dissipate, a chilling, profound truth remains. The life of a Joseon queen, far from being a fairy tale of absolute power and serene beauty, was a relentless testament to personal sacrifice, profound isolation, and an almost unimaginable lack of freedom, making it fundamentally miserable. Think about the abrupt end to childhood and the forced entry into a world of political maneuvering. You were chosen not for love, but for lineage and political utility, thrust into a lavish royal wedding that was a performance of state, not a personal union. From that moment, your entire existence became an instrument of the dynasty, stripping away any semblance of individual identity or personal desire. Then consider the suffocating demands of your role, the relentless pressure to produce a male heir, the constant threat from rival consorts and their ambitious families, the pervasive fear of palace intrigue and plots. These were not abstract concerns, but daily anxieties that permeated every interaction and every meal. Your very life, and that of your family, hung precariously on the king's fickle favor and the shifting tides of court politics, and perhaps most profoundly, the gilded cage itself. You lived in immense splendor, surrounded by thousands of servants, yet were profoundly isolated. Royal protocol dictated every breath, every movement, every word, leaving no room for spontaneity or genuine human connection. Your children were raised by others, your birth family kept at a distance, and your relationships with the king and consorts were often cold, formal, and fraught with tension. This pervasive solitude, despite outward opulence, created a profound and inescapable misery. Ultimately, the story of a Joseon queen is a powerful counter-narrative to romanticized notions of royalty. It reveals a life where immense privilege was inextricably tied to immense suffering, where power came at the cost of personal autonomy, and where even the highest status could not buy true freedom or happiness. Your existence was a paradox revered by a nation, yet a prisoner within your own palace. Your life a constant negotiation between duty and despair as you now drift into a deep, comforting sleep. Let the whispers of palace intrigue and the weight of ancient protocol fade into the quiet background of history. You're safe, warm, and free to pursue any path you choose, incredibly far removed from the soul-crushing realities of Joseon Korea's inner court. May your dreams be peaceful, filled with the boundless possibilities that come with true self-determination and genuine human connection. A stark contrast to the miserable truth we've explored tonight. And now, good night, and have sweet dream